Hello, I, Lakshmi, on behalf of the EdTech Society, welcome one and all to the third Perspectives panel discussion. Before I begin, for the first timers, an introduction to EdTech Society. EdTech Society is a professional, not for profit association started in India by individuals who are committed to improving instruction and learning through the use of education technology. EdTech Society members are researchers, developers, and practitioners in the field of education technology. Through the various events that we conduct, we are trying to build a thriving and diverse EdTech society. Today's perspective discussion is a third in its series and is titled Learning Sciences Perspective about Using and Evaluating Technology in Education. The perspective session moderator is Professor Sugat Dabulkar. Welcome, Professor Sugat.
Thank you, Lakshmi.
Professor Sugat is an assistant research professor at Tufts University, School of Arts and Science Education. He identifies as a learning scientist. His research focuses on investigating student participation as they navigate different aspects of their identities and values in a learning context. Over to you, Professor Sugat. We have an amazing and diverse panel today, and we look forward to hearing from them all. The stage is yours.
Yes, thank you, Lakshmi. Hi, everyone. Good evening if you're in India. Good morning if you are in the US, or good afternoon if you are somewhere else in the world. This is a third perspective session, and the first one in this academic year, and it's about the field of learning sciences, which is about a 40 years old field that deals about scientific, humanistic, and critical understanding of learning, with a focus on designing and implementing learning innovations. And we have a panel of fantastic learning scientists who are going to talk to us about their perspectives related to using technology, designing technology, and evaluating the use of technology. So Aditi is our panel member. So Aditi is an assistant teaching professor at the IIT Gandhinagar, affiliated with the Center of Creative Learning, whose research lies at the intersection of STEM education, learning sciences, and educational technologies. Our second panel member is Minu Nandakumar, who's a program lead for schools of specialized excellence at Ashoka University. And she has worked at the EdTech Toolna project of IIT Bombay EdTech department. The third panelist is Dr. Shamya Karumbaya, who's an assistant professor in educational psychology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the US, who studies ways to promote student engagement and learning in adaptive and artificially intelligent educational systems in a fair and equitable manner. The next panelist is Dr. Gayatri Jayatirtha, who's a computing innovation fellow at the University of Oregon, Eugene in the US, where she works with computing teachers to think about and develop critical computing curricular materials and teacher professional development programs. And our fifth panel member is Vishesh Kumar. So Dr. Vishesh Kumar is a postdoctoral researcher at Northwestern University, working on designing and studying activities that center social agency and play in learning. So welcome, panel members. I'm excited to have this discussion with you. And I will pose the first question to all of you, and we will go in the same sequence as I introduced you. Could you please tell us what the field of learning sciences is to you? And how do you see yourself as a learning scientist?
So, hi Chagat, hi everybody. Really excited to be here. So, for me, learning sciences is the field which theorizes how learning happens in various scenarios. But of course, first we have to ask, what does it even mean to learn? So, learning could mean different things to different people. For the teacher who is teaching fifth grade math, learning is about her kids being able to solve fraction problems. But for the faculty at an undergraduate engineering institution, learning could be about the students at the end of the program seeing themselves as innovative problem solvers. So, what we see is that these two types of learnings are very different things, but most of the time we want both from our learners. We want them to have certain knowledge and skills, but we also want them to develop identities. So, learning sciences for me is the field which gives me the theoretical tools to understand how both of these kinds of learning happen. How do changes in kids' knowledge happen, which is explained by a certain set of theories, and also how do changes in engineering students' identities happen, which is explained by another set of theories. So, as a researcher, I just see myself as a person who is curious about how people learn in different scenarios, and I'm passionate about making that learning happen in different scenarios. So whether it's a sixth grade science classroom or it's an engineering maker space, so I see myself as somebody who wants to understand how people learn and make better learning happen. So I take um, whatever we understand about learning currently, so these theoretical tools that learning sciences gives us, and I try to design learning environments and then study the learning processes that happen in these learning environments. So, in that sense, I use learning sciences both in design and in analysis.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'll go next. So, hi everyone, very excited to be on this panel. So, before I answer this question, I think I'll just briefly expand upon my experience so that I can relate to the response that I give. My experience in education space has entirely been in the public school education system in India, whether as an elementary school teacher myself or working with government school teachers in their professional development. And also, like briefly, like Ashoka was mentioning, I was also part of the EdTech Tulna, where we were designing frameworks to evaluate EdTech products and say working with state governments in adoption of those. And currently, I work in a curriculum development space with the state government. So, given these diverse roles that I've been fortunate in the EdTech space, I think learning sciences has been a field that has enabled me to understand what can help people learn, right? And more than just understanding what help people learn, what processes or strategies, it also pushes me to inquire and kind of understand how that particular process could be, say, adapted to the diverse educational context or setting that I am often faced up with. That can be like a traditional classroom in India to a digital platform like an edtech product itself. So I think that's the space where I've most interacted with the learning sciences domain. And that's where I'm more curious to explore further also. So it has been mostly on the application side. So I would rather position me as a practitioner in the field. That's perhaps what I would define as my identity in this space. Yeah.
Thank you, Minu.
I don't know what more I can add for defining learning sciences that Aditi and Minu hasn't already covered. So, in nutshell, for me, learning sciences is the study of learning, and particularly as it happens in real world contexts, and also ways in which we can design resources and environments that we can improve learning in those contexts. And as a learning sciences scientist, I see myself designing technological support that meets individual student needs, but at the same time, also making sure that these tools are synergistic with classroom practices and is equitable to all students.
Thank you. Thank you, Shamya.
Well, this is hard to go forth because all the beautiful things have already been said. But I think for me, the field of learning sciences has been all of what you've said. And maybe I'll just tell it again so that I can build on that to particularly pay attention to one aspect that I focus my work on. So I think for learning sciences for me has been about thinking about the layered nature, like as Aditi was telling, right? It is about identity development. As Minu was telling, like it is about creating support for learners, or as even Shamya was emphasizing, that it all needs to be looked at within real contexts or real settings. Um, and for me, that also means that learning sciences is helping us complexify or complicate what we notice and sometimes tend to simplify the processes, that it is layered. There is more of a lot of social aspects, that okay, students are learning with peers, or are they doing things by themselves? How are they being supported to collaborate, for example, that I'm sure Vishesh is going to talk a little more about. Or even the cultural aspects, right? How are students supported to bring in practices, let's say collaborative practices, back from their homes for how they collaborate with adults in their home settings into, and how do we make those valuable as assets, treat them as assets in our learning context, for example. And for that, my focus, I feel that learning sciences has also helped me complicate and think more closely about the role of teachers in these contexts. As adults in the room, how do their practices influence and support or not what we want students to get? So in that way, I feel that while learning sciences is helping us look at the different contextual aspects, it is also helping us pay closer attention to teacher practices and their implications for student learning. And I think one other bigger question is helping us ask and push the boundaries of what we are learning for, learning towards what ends. And I'm definitely not making this up. The field has been talking a lot about this, and just given my own intersectional field of computer science education, it almost becomes imperative that we think about this question, like computer science towards what ends, or even edtech towards what ends. What is the world that we're envisioning, that we're actually teaching and learning for? So that's been what learning sciences has been to me. And yeah, like I think of learning sciences or myself as a learning scientist in a few different ways because of my engagement with teachers. Methodologically, how do you create these supports that you need for students to thrive in your class or in your learning context? And I have been thinking about co-designing with teachers instead of designing something and putting that into context. I've been partnering with teachers to think about what those designs can mean and how can it be valuable for students for their particular contexts, for their sociocultural backgrounds, and sociopolitical realities. Um, and of course, right, like analytically, it has given us a whole ton of theories that I'm sure we will talk more about today. As I'm telling, sociocultural, sociopolitical, being able to look at the different layers that affect or shape learning and learning opportunities for students. Um, so yeah, I think I draw from a lot of those theories and hope to contribute back, but it is also constantly shaping how I design, and not just what I design and whom I design with.
Thank you, Gayatri.
Yeah, mirroring everyone's description. I can't think of anything novel to say. Everyone has covered beautiful ground. The things that I would also highlight that I am in my personal experience in the field and the work, what is exciting me and what I'm trying to move towards is again both the real world contextness, paying more and more attention to trying to be in places where people are doing things that they do for structural reasons or for cultural reasons, And the other big asset I find of learning sciences, because of its both newness, kind of, and for its cross-disciplinariness, how it affords these many expansive definitions and perspectives of learning. So that to me invites Gayatri's also description of paying attention to consequential goals is how I think of this. That when we think about what learning is of interest, does it do something useful? That we can articulate an axiology, our ethics and values for why this learning should happen, and that we design specifically to support that, to help everyone pay more attention to that, and facilitate that as is possible in the context we're working in.
Thank you so much, Vishesh, and thank you all for these important and insightful views about the field of learning sciences. So, simply putting, learning sciences can be thought as a science of learning, but it's way more than that, right? And it's sort of developing both. So, not just scientific insights, but humanistic insights, critical insights into learning. And what I was hearing from the panel is complexifying and simplifying different things. Things that are thought to be simple can be very, very complex when you take a particular orientation, particular approach, and how we conceptualize learning in various different contexts, whether in a classroom or learning happening at a playground or in a museum, or just somebody's doing something on their computer, playing the computer, and so on. So depending on the context, the learning could look very different, and it could look very different from how one participates in a specific community of practice. So the next question for the panel is about theoretical perspective and methodological orientation in the field of learning sciences. And so learning sciences sort of is a subfield within the educational sciences as a broad field, right? And so educational research uses various different kinds of methodological approaches, for example, randomized controlled trials, and learning sciences have developed specific subset of methodological approaches like design-based research. So I'm curious. So about both these things, theoretical perspective and methodological orientation. So from situated theories of learning to embodied learning in the field of learning sciences, to develop fundamental insights into what it means to learn, is one thing. And there are new methodological orientations from design-based research methods to specific analytical approaches, such as interaction analysis or knowledge analysis, etc. So so how do you use various ideas, various theoretical perspectives and methodological approaches in the field of learning sciences in your work? And anybody can jump in, so we will sort of have it as a discussion. So and you can feel free to jump in more than once.
Okay, if no one's starting, then I'll go.
Yes.
So I think I'm a pragmatist in that sense, and the methods and the theories that I choose are very much guided by the research question that I'm asking. And for most of my work, we have been asking questions around how people learn through hands-on work, and so that's been heavily guided, for instance, by embodied learning perspectives, because we are thinking about how people learn through actions and through interactions, and so what happens when the body is involved in learning. So that automatically leads to us kind of adopting this embodied learning perspective. And even in terms of analysis, then we take more interaction analysis approaches, or sometimes we use learning analytics if we have collected that large data sets. But then on the other hand, again, when we expand the scope of our work and we start asking questions related to identities, and we are now looking at longer scale work. It's not a single episode, but we are looking at, let's say, work across a semester or across a year. Then, of course, we are applying situated learning perspectives, and we are doing ethnographies, because we cannot, that's the appropriate method for studying this longitudinal work. So I think broadly, design-based research is the approach. That is the umbrella, because we are trying to study learning very much in real-world context and intervene in real-world context to redesign the scenarios to make them better suited for learning. So design-based research is always the larger umbrella within which we work. But depending on specific research questions, the exact methods change. And of course, the theoretical perspectives that we take are also adapted. So that's my 2 cents.
I can jump in real quick. So my background mostly was in developing AI systems for education, and being trained as a computer scientist, I came to this work thinking that I don't need to have a theory, and that I can build these systems, and they would, I just need to think about what individual student needs are and how those could be met in this technology, right? And one thing that coming to learning sciences has helped me understand is that whether we acknowledge or not, there is always a theory underneath the decisions that you're making. And it's always helpful to be very explicit and intentional about what your theory of learning is. How do you define learning? How do you measure learning because of your definition? And consequently, how do you then say if something has been a successful learning? So maybe a learning outcome, for instance. So an example of how my thinking has changed for me is to think, as I said before, technology as like this student AI interaction, right? And then if I want to think about this AI as a tool, as a scaffold, then it is inherently sociocultural, meaning it is a dialogic process. Human mediation is important. More often than not, especially in classrooms, this technology is part of an ecosystem where there are other scaffolds, other tool material scaffolds, but also social scaffolds. There could be peers and teachers, and then if you keep expanding, you would also think about how students bring their lived experiences to this space, and the history, the cultural practices, all of that. It's really difficult to think about a student interacting with an AI as a disconnected system from all of these other factors that are playing in. So learning sciences has really helped me understand what that context and what the role of that contextual factors are. And just to give sort of like an example of how my work has changed, more recently I've been working on a project for developing ways to support multilingual learners in classrooms. And then and there, if I think of my theoretical perspective, certainly I can think of technology, distributed scaffolding, all of that. But inherently, when we think of multilingual learners and how there has been a hegemonic view of English-only academic discourse, then and there, one theoretical perspective that has been very helpful in understanding the technology's role in classroom has been racial linguistics and social linguistics. What is the role of language? Why are we so obsessed about creating boundaries between language? This is English, this is Hindi, this is Kannada, as opposed to when, say, we are talking to our friends or family at home, and we use whichever language comes to it's most accessible to convey the idea we have, right? So it's almost like a unitary linguistic repertoire that students have, that they bring to the classroom. And it's difficult to think about the learning where you're saying that now is English time, now is Hindi time, right? So could we maybe think about AI? Could we think about all these technological advancements as for a subversive perspective, instead of perpetuating some of these problematic assumptions that we have about unjust social structure? So could we think about allowing making space for allowing students to use whichever language is accessible to them at a given point in time to convey their ideas and to be part of learning in classroom. So there's just an example of how I went from being a computer scientist and learning scientist, and how this whole expansive nature of understanding has been accessible for me.
Yeah, I think because there's silence, I'll go next. It's something similar to what she was also sharing earlier. When I went into a classroom first as a teacher, I was not at all aware of all these learning theories or other aspects that we technically talk of, right? But the larger goal is to make the class engaging. I mean, that's a very brief idea that you go on, like make the students an active participant. Only when I've traveled so far, and when in my current work, when I design, say, learning experiences or look for edtech products, it's then when you think, oh, it's a theory that talks about learner being a very active participant in the whole learning process, where you look at the teacher as a facilitator, the importance of, say, scaffolding, as it was already discussed. So all of these aspects, I think initially it started off as a very unknowing part of the whole um, teaching experience that I was doing. But now it has become a very much ingrained component of my work. These all aspects of, say, even going beyond, like even when we are designing a learning activity or you're looking at an edtech product, are the activities there going beyond as basic as a rote memorization, right? Like, are they focusing more than just factual recall? Are they challenging the learners? And that's perhaps where the learning happens. But the idea is to just scaffold the whole learning process for them. So it might look very different in a classroom, a teacher-led classroom, versus when it is learned through an edtech product. So how can that play out in these two contexts? So those were the things that has like very much part of the work that I do right now. And hence, uh, I think the theoretical perspectives largely influence the kind of work with respect to, say, curriculum development or choosing edtech products in my work at this point.
Vishesh, do you want to go next? Because I feel like I have a story to tell and it may take long.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. I have I think only two tiny nudges of new things that I've been trying to center more and more in my work and thinking. A lot going to the real world context. Some of the, in my impression, newer frameworks are thinking about this community-based design research and culturally sustaining frameworks. And both of these to me feel like very productive pushes in the field towards both paying attention to history, justice, and equity issues, and in action committing to centering partnership or working with the goals of the space, people, and systems that you're trying to work with. So there is similar to DBR, but I think one level deeper. I think this move is fighting the broader thrust of academia and making theories that are more widely applicable. And I feel like that question was coming up a lot in the posted questions for discussion later. But I find this thrust useful to try to step away from thinking of theories as universal at all and thinking of our work more and more as like we are both trying to learn from things that already happen as researchers, not also as people who live in these different spaces, but as learning scientists, etc. And from that, trying to enhance or support what we think is useful, and especially what people in those spaces and communities find useful. All right, Gayatri.
Yeah, thank you. I love how you pushed, or how you are helping us think more expansively, just even about the theories that we talk about and we hope to build on, right? So just to give a little more context, the reason I thought, okay, I should go last was I would like to tell a little more about the context of my work so that we can talk more concretely about the work I do. So very briefly, this I work within the context called Exploring Computer Science. It is an introductory high school computer science curriculum that has been widely adopted in the US and Puerto Rico. Um, so this was designed at about like around 2012, 11, 12. So it's been a while. However, it also comes, it's not just a curricular package, right? It is not just giving you a set of lessons and activities. There is a teacher professional development program that comes with the program. And it is a 2-year teacher professional development. So speaking of highlighting and thinking more closely about the context in which learning happens, teacher preparation is taken seriously in this context, and teachers spend a week during the summer, engaging with one another, learning about the program, learning about what it means to teach computer science in equitable ways without being exclusionary, without losing students in the process, while making everybody feel welcome, at least welcome enough to explore the subject, not necessarily to all of them pursuing it, but developing some basic literacies. So that being said, teachers then meet during the school year, and then they move on to come back another summer where they take that opportunity to reflect on their learning. So as I said, the program was launched at least about like 15 years back, which means there is a very wide and deep community of teachers, community of practice among teachers who identify with the program, who have been teaching the program for several years now, who also facilitate, not just teach in their classrooms, but also facilitate teacher professional development programs for other teachers during the summers and during the school year. So when it was time for us to revamp the program, as the original program designers had envisioned, we wanted to lean on the wisdom and expertise of teachers who had already been teaching the program. And at the same time, we wanted to expand our own visions for what it means to teach computer science. So speaking of, theoretical, like what is it that you can take away, was to value and center voices that are traditionally not heard of when you think of like designing materials for classrooms. And in this case, it was about inviting teachers into that design space without turning a blind eye to the fact that there is a power dynamic. Researchers are the ones who have resources, who bring in the money to do the work, who may have that power and agency to plan these sessions, but we also wanted to make it as equitable as possible for teachers to feel that they not even just feel for teachers to bring in their perspectives, their personal and professional experiences for what it means to teach computer science. And at the same time, we all did a whole round of looking at different materials, basically drawing from the work of Dr. Nikki Washington and colleagues at Duke University, which highlights the role of identity and cultural competence in computing. So drawing from that, we, along with teachers, we all did a whole, like a set of pre-work that would orient us to thinking about what it means to teach computer science, what it means to teach computer science in ways that support communities, that support their thriving, that work towards centering the marginalized and problem solving in those spaces. And we brainstormed ideas with the teachers, and we created structures in place for teachers to then co-author these lessons, which we are calling as justice-oriented computer science lessons and activities. And now we are moving towards the third year, where we are doing a soft launch of the 10th version of this program, which will then be taken up by a few different classrooms in the US. So methodologically, inviting teachers, making space for participation in ways that value their wisdom, um, and pushing boundaries, therefore, of like the otherwise ways of thinking about designing for classroom contexts is something that I have been growing into. Definitely, this is not where I started, right? As many of my colleagues here on the panel have also suggested, this is not where we started mostly, but you grow into it as you think more closely about, especially in my case, the impact of the work. What do I want at the end of this? Uh, and how do I want to reach that goal? So thinking about that more closely has gotten me to partner with teachers, bring in their perspectives, and at the same time, just going back to that question of what are we trying to teach computer science for? And then asking those harder questions of the discipline and of ourselves, and imagining new lessons and activities at the intersections of, let's say, gender and computer science, um, race, ethnicity, and computer science, colonialism and computer science, the extractive and exploitative, practices that I know some of you were pointing at, in EdTech spaces, data privacy, like where are the boundaries? Who is getting the data? Who has access to that data? What are they doing with it? What it means for the users, the consumers. So being able to talk about this in a computer science classroom is already pushing boundaries in some interesting ways. So I am constantly inspired to bring in some of these theories while listening to what teachers have to say, because they are the ones embedded in the context in which we actually want to cause change. And at the same time, being more reflective in the process, thinking more closely about what this means more broadly. And I think learning sciences has informed and continues to also, highlight how maybe, we, as Vishesh was telling, right, like not lean on so much that you stop listening to what's going on in reality. Yes, theory informed, but at the same time, centering practices. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Thank you, Gayatri. Thank you, panel members, for your insights about various theoretical perspectives regarding what it means to learn something and what it means to design something to support specific forms of learning, how to engage teachers in various ways so that they become co-designers, they have their voice reflected in the ways we incorporate new ideas, new practices in teaching, and using various methodologies to contribute to building new theories, new ideas in the field of learning sciences. So the next question is more about technology, and we have been hearing about technologies getting more and more integrated in education, in our lives in general, right? Ranging from the development of and use of educational softwares, but now more about uh, generative AI and tools like ChatGPT or tinkering spaces, maker spaces in schools. So, what suggestions and cautions do you have when we think about education technology from the learning sciences perspective?
I can get us started. Oh,
Yeah, sure.
was
Go
there
ahead.
anything? No, Minu, you should. You totally should, and I can jump in.
I'll just share my first thoughts, and then perhaps when the panel share, I can share more. So I think the very latest discussions about, say, AI, ChatGPT being there, and technology integration and all of that, I think there is a large scare. I don't think we need to be so much of taking it from a scared perspective. This is not the first technology that has come in that has changed how we teach or kind of transform the education space, right? Like, for example, when internet came, that has kind of contributed to change how education has become more accessible, or how information has become more accessible. So how we start thinking about education has changed then also. So I think we just need to look at it as a like a catalyst for change. Like it needs to make us think about, of course it has implications for the education space, but just to think and reflect on what in the education space it is leading us to change, right? Like if we are to maintain the normal ways or the status quo of like the way we assess our children, then perhaps you might see a chat gpt as a threat or a scare, but it might be perceived as a catalyst to change the way we assess itself. So we need to look at what is meaningful to assess, and how can we go about assessing, and it can be done across the subject. So rather than seeing ChatGPT, I'm just taking that name, but any other, say, generative AI or other tools as a threat, I think we need to kind of reflect on what we want to teach, how we want to teach, and kind of how we assess what we are teaching, right? Say, for example, like I can just take an example. If we say maths, we don't necessarily have to. We could use leverage this tool for it. Perhaps students could create questions with them, or they could get ChatGPT to solve a question, kind of critically analyze the solution process. So there, they're kind of applying what they know of the process, and then seeing if it is perhaps a different way of doing or a wrong way of doing. So it's about the analysis of the response that the ChatGPT gives. Say, if in a history, it can be about writing an alternate history in itself and then kind of evaluating it. So it doesn't have to be. So I think we need to move away towards more um, skills that is in the need at the time, like more critical thinking and problem solving skills, and leverage the tool in a way that it complements the teaching learning process in classroom. I don't think it is need to be perceived as a scare. Rather, it needs to be seen as a catalyst for changing the way we think about our teaching and learning in classrooms.
I want to respond to what Minu said, which is very interesting, if that's okay. So I agree with you, Minu, that the element of fear around it. Well, there may be some reasons for why. I mean, you may worry about like privacy, safety issues, potential adversarial attacks, and such, right? But other than that, one thing that Minu said that resonated with me is ways in which we can think about using this technology, but in a way that challenges maybe status quo. So before that, I want to quickly clarify a couple of things, which is, say, even with ChatGPT, right, or a lot of these large language models, it may look new to the public, as in that this is the first time that you're interfacing, but language models have been around for more than 50 years or so. In the nutshell, it basically is trying to predict which is the next most probable word given a sequence of words or something. Yeah, there is a little bit of fanciness to it, but most of what we are seeing in terms of the core technology, the idea of it is still the same that computer science has been exploring for several decades now. So if anything, sometimes the thing that frustrates me is when we try to give a lot more credit to AI for what humans are doing. So a couple of ways to think about it is, AI is able to these large language models are able to do what it's able to do because of the human knowledge that has gone into it in the form of text that was fed to it, right? Or even when, say, you're interfacing with ChatGPT, say a student is asking a question, ChatGPT says some things, and the student is engaging with this AI tool. Even there's a lot of work that is being done by the student to make meaning. AI is not this idea of natural language understanding. I think the concept of understanding itself is questionable. Understanding is an inherently human thing, right? It's generating the next word. That doesn't mean, like, how do you know the intent behind what the next word that was generated by ChatGPT? So if anything, I feel like, or more often than not, in every new wave, like Minu was saying, of every new form of technology that has come in, there's a lot of human work that goes into it. And to piggyback on what Gayatri was saying, if there is going to be a good use of AI in education is likely going to come from teachers and all the efforts that they are going to put to make it useful in their context in there. And that is where, going back to what I started with, how do we use it? Could we use it in a way that pushes back the some of the unjust practices right now? Could we use it I almost think about this as like a tool in humans hand, and and I remember Kentaro Toyama's quote of a law of amplification. So technology amplifying human intent, meaning if your intent is to use it for good, technology will amplify that intent. But you can also think of adversarial ways in which you can use it, and that could, for instance, ways of using AI in the way we have used technology before, which suppresses student agency, identity development, critical thinking. You could continue to use technology in the same old forms that has, if anything, continued to oppress students.
Thank
Yeah.
you. I
To
will give
jump-
a chance. Oh, no,
Sorry.
jump
Go
in,
ahead.
jump in.
Gayatri, do you
No,
want to
Aditi,
go?
go ahead. No, it's fine.
Okay.
You can go.
Okay. So just because of something that Shamya said, that the idea of intent, right? How do you use technology? And there's one worrying trend, at least, I mean, living and working in India, that I see, especially within the Indian edtech space, is that technology is the solution. Right, so technology is like a panacea for all evil, right? And if we have good technology, tech tools, people are naturally going to learn. And time after time, there is research, and even some of the work that we are recently doing, it shows that it doesn't matter how sophisticated the technology is. Even very highly sophisticated technology can continue to suppress learners' agency, to marginalize them, to make it difficult for them to learn, while very simple technologies, what we like to call low tech ed tech, can sometimes amplify human learning because of what they're doing with the technology. And so I think this is a point that I keep harping on all the time with people. It's not what the technology does, it's what the learner does. And as long as we keep using technology to make learners, and to add to what Gayatri was saying, make teachers do better things, then good things will happen. Learners will learn, they will, their practices are centered, they are demarginalized. Otherwise, we are continuing to see these processes being reproduced. The people who already have access to good educational resources are continuing to get access to better technologies and do better, while those who don't are continuing to struggle. So and I think one of the reasons that I think for this is that people forget the learner doing anything part, and that's where learning sciences theories help us, because that's where learning sciences tells us about the fact that it's not the technology which does anything, but it's the learning process, the things that learners do. And when we have that background, sort of that understanding, that recognition, then we focus on the interaction with the technology and rather than the technology itself. So I think rather than people have a tendency to make assumptions when they design with technology, oh, I learned good with technology in this way, or I have seen technology being used in this way. I mean, I always tell people, you wouldn't make an assumption about how gravity worked if you were designing a car. Why would you do that when you were trying to design technology to educate your kids? I mean, there is research around this, right? There is learning sciences has been doing this work for 40 years now. That's what we are trying to figure out, what works well for our children. Why would you make an design technology based on an assumption rather than on the basis of some theories which learning scientists tell us? And this is a topic that I can go on for hours, as you can see. So I'm going to stop, and maybe I'll jump back in later.
I just quickly highlight one thing, because I think across what all of you shared so far, one thing that being in computer science classrooms, the way I use technology is a little different from how maybe EdTech thinks of technology, right? So in our classrooms, we use technology to learn about technology. So, for example, ChatGPT, like as we are interacting and engaging, for example, not that we do it, but if we do it, we will be more thinking about how is this particular response being generated, thinking about the data sets that are informing this response, for example. So those are some, as Aditi was telling, what students do with this is more important and more important to pay attention to, right? And in that, I think one thing that I would like to remind, and Shamya brought it up briefly in her point earlier about the tendency of all of these tools to just produce status quo, because they're always constantly learning from historical data. So if your historical data has excluded somebody, your tools will also do the same, because they do not learn. They have no means of learning anything different from what the previous data is telling them. So it is important to be mindful of that when we are thinking about technologies in this context, right? And I'm particularly talking about generative AI, which feeds off of historical data. But even generally, we have seen this happen in other contexts where there was a healthcare solution like vaccinating everybody for COVID, and there was an app that was introduced, and that became the panacea. Now we have an app, all the problems about vaccination will be solved. And then we realized, wait a minute, what if people don't have access to the app? What if the app actually is glitchy? What if there is no internet in a lot of places, the infrastructure required to support this? So a similar thing will definitely happen with education too. Yes, there is teaching and learning, but the moment you bring in EdTech, there will be some of these concerns that will get amplified. People who were already at the margins may further get pushed away. And I think it's important to pay attention to all of this and not get sold to the idea that bringing in technology will somehow solve every problem that we have in education. I think, I just want to tell that. And I know there's a lot of wisdom in the room. I don't want to take a lot of time.
I wanted to add a tiny nudge, which I thought Gayatri was going to say this. I think this is more Gayatri's lane. But especially the conversation on ChatGPT and where we started around fear also, I want to second, the priority on having an articulated learning goal, etc. Or not just even learning, like all of the different phenomena that happen when you introduce technology or whatever is happening by default in the classroom. I think it is very critical what you are reinforcing when you implement or add something. And I think this also touches to Deepak's question. Like, I think there is an inbuilt, like, how does integrating technology support? What could be if how do we make sure that integrating technology does not take away from what are the goals of the classroom to one extent already, I think is on us as designers and researchers of this. Like, we should be centering what are the teacher classroom needs, environment needs for these things. But I think in a broader context, there is also an aspect of what politics and power, politics in a broader sense, gets supported when we use specific tools and how these things go. Like, we're talking about data privacy as somewhat of a common phenomenon, but I think there are more specifics around how OpenAI is working and what they're using. Like, I think we often essentialize these things like either this will solve or it's evil, but there is like language models. We can use language models and different generative tools that have been developed more consciously, that are more conscious of the resources they're using and what businesses are being supported when we pick certain tools versus other tools, and how we talk about these things also. To me, that feels central, again, across classrooms when we introduce technology, but especially in computer science spaces. Like, if we have this space to talk about what this technology means and how it works, not just at a technical level, but also at a socio-political level.
Thank you. Thank you, Vishesh. Thank you, panelists. I think two important things that I'm hearing in this conversation is sort of not fearing the technology and sort of what it will do, but also thinking carefully about what we care about when we think about learning, right? And how do we see students participate in various ways when they learn, and the focus being more on they not just factual memorization, but when the tools are integrated in education in such a way that they channelize learning in a way that learners and teachers want. So not just as a solution to the old problems, but figuring out how we can collectively think about new ideas, and in some cases even solving real world problems or discussing about real world problems, right? So how do we sort of bring those conversations into a learning space? So we have a lot of questions from audience, and another thing I want to mention to the audience is if you have a specific question for a specific panelist, please feel free to say that I have this question for this panelist. But I will take the first question, that is from Shrunika Kanan, and the question is. What are some challenges you face while studying the process of learning in the real world?
Okay, I can quickly jump in. This is line with what we have been discussing so far. So, if you want to say contrast cognitive science with learning sciences, and how you can just from theoretical, just the epistemological stance of a field like cognitive science that justifies something like an lab study where you can bring students, you will control for all these different variables, and you give them an hour to work with the technology, and then you do a pre-post test and show that some technology is effective or not, or you study the process of learning, say affect or metacognition, keeping sort of like having control over it's sort of like a almost like a control in the sense that you are a control that you get because you are devoid of the real world context, right? So when I contrast those methods with learning sciences, some of the challenges, obvious challenges that come to my mind is all these different contextual factors that play in. So you can think about it both in terms of asset, right? Meaning that helps us explain some of these nuances of understanding learning that you cannot get from a controlled experiment. But at the same time, I could bet that we could never collect, if you want to collect all sorts of contextual factors to understand, to make a claim, a generalizable claim about this is how learning works, it's pretty much not possible. So if anything, instead of thinking about this as a challenge, I would say embracing it as the fact, the reality, and to accept that it's probably there are some situations where it's probably not going to be in the best of our interest to make those kinds of generalizable claims, and to think about learning as always contextual, and that anything that you're designing or anything you're coming up as, oh, this is my theoretical, uh, claim about how learning happens, thinking about it as iterative. And going back to, I think, Sugat, you were mentioning, and a couple of us mentioned about design-based research. That's the idea of design-based research, right? Like iteratively, while you're designing a technology, for instance, you're also refining theory in the context in which you're studying. So thinking about theories as not the static sort of generalizable theories, but rather in a particular context that you're designing solutions for, theory building, theory refining happening parallelly with design research and development of technological solutions. So I think about this as a beautiful thing and embrace the. It's new for me, but I have really enjoyed the shift that I've had from the burden of coming up with generalizable theories to accepting that there are these constraints. So I think of it as challenge, but also challenge that pushes us to um, uh, be true to the realities.
I can just build on that, just as I also prepare to do data collection in a few, like tomorrow this time. uh, no, it is uh, definitely not straightforward, as Shamya was telling, as like setting up an experiment, trying to control for things, and having something definitive that you're looking for. So if you're trying to research, if you're trying to study in real world settings, it will be looking very different. It will feel very different. For example, with this teacher, workshop that I'm attending, we don't want to video record because that feels very intrusive to have like 4 or 5, video recorders at different parts of the room. Teachers are not used to it. They've come there only for a workshop. So, okay, then audio recording. But audio recording can be messy. What if the tables are pretty close by? You cannot be like, oh, for data collection purposes, sit separately and sit away, because that would then inhibit collaboration, right? So then when you listen to the audio, it feels messy. But at the same time, as Shamya was telling, this real world setting can also open up opportunities. Just as it happened in a similar setting, like a workshop setting with the same community but different teachers. What was fascinating was we were trying to understand, like, oh, teacher growth. How are they, like, identifying themselves professionally? How are they growing with this experience? What was interesting to notice was, yes, they're doing some conversations, they're having some conversations. We're doing interaction analysis, right? Once you have the interactions, what do? You analyze these interactions. So it was interesting to see, yes, during these structured sessions that we had, they're talking about things that you may want to hear, that your theory already confirms that, okay, this is how things work. And, it beautifully maps onto the theories that you're thinking about. But during those breaks, when teachers are actually checking on each other, they're connecting, they're able to relate to one another. That is exactly an opportunity where, in this real world context, this is what matters. Teachers are able to even do this work because they relate to one another in certain ways. So that relationality kind of surfaced. And this is not something that the theory is instantly telling you. Yes, there are theories that tell you that relationality is fundamental to how you do work with people. But in this particular context of, like, working with teachers, co-designing certain materials, having that trust in the community to be able to talk about politically sensitive things and not be, mistaken or not feel like it is a space for it. So to do that work, what was important that we realized in interactions when we are listening to, like, teachers, maybe during their break times, they know that they're being recorded, right? And yet they were like checking on each other, and that relationality is something that surfaced, which was possible because we were in a real world context. We were thinking of this as, yes, theory is informing us for how we are structuring these opportunities, but at the same time, we are open, we are listening to what is emerging that may push even the boundaries of how the theory has construed this process, so far. So I think there are challenges, and at the same time, there can be opportunities that may open up if you're paying attention to what the context have to say, what the participants are doing, which may sometimes not necessarily fit well within the theory that is informing your work.
Thank you, Gayatri. Before going to other panelists, there is another question which is about realities of the world that Deepak Pathak is asking. How are integrating technology by teachers in short period, 40 minutes, can be effective as they have to complete syllabus, right? So there are realities of doing research and there are realities of practicing education. So that there are other challenges related to that as well. So if you can answer in connection to these two questions.
I'm just going to jump onto what Gayatri was saying, because it was very interesting what she was saying about how, and also Shamya, that if you, yes, collecting data in the real world is very challenging. It's extremely frustrating. That's the reality. Let's accept it. but it is also immensely satisfying because, like Gayatri said, we find things which we did not even know existed, right? So when we're studying, we are studying how kids are learning engineering design across a semester, right? So it's a project-based learning course, and that means that they are working on their projects. They are supposed to be working on it in the lab during designated times, but that's not when they're working. They are scheduling time at 2 a.m. and working in the lab, which means our research assistants, God bless them, are in the lab at 2 a.m. Actually collecting the data, and they are trying to understand. Of course, you cannot record because they are making things, which means they're going from the 3D printer to the laser cutter, and you would just need a very good cameraman to follow them around. So this is really, it's ethnography. They're just following, research assistants just following them around. But then here we were thinking about engineering design and innovation, and how do people learn that. And what we found out was that there was a challenge completely in a different place, which was that students don't understand how to integrate social reality into the problem definition. So we were actually thinking about, how do we get them to design and prototype, but we found a problem at an even earlier stage because we were listening to them having conversations about scoping their problems, in various places. And so we are now able to document perhaps a problem which is going to lead to this bigger problem, which we had no idea about. So we may not be able to say something very specific about the work that we started out doing, but it's very interesting that we now have a new understanding of a learning of a different kind, right? So yes, there are challenges, and we have to accept it. We have to accept that we always can't have cameras, we can't have video recorders, but that there are ways to do the research and to contextualize the learning processes in wherever we are working. So yeah, just adding on to what everyone said.
Yeah, any thoughts about the next question about integrating technology when there are other constraints in the existing educational system, the short teaching periods and completing syllabus and so on? That is a challenge that many teachers face, right?
I feel like I should jump in because it's related to teaching and teachers, but again, I'll keep it short so that we discuss more. There is no bullet, there is no like a one point answer for this, right? But maybe something to think about is with that integration, it is not just an additive integration, right? It's not just like, oh, you had 40 minutes, now spend 10 more minutes using this technology. That is not how technology integration works. Technology integration works at a much deeper level, right? That is, it qualitatively shifts what the teacher will be hopefully doing in the classroom. Instead of, it's not just a PowerPoint that you're asking them to use, or maybe even if that is the case, the way the teachers and the students will be engaging will be shifting. So that same 40 minutes may look very different qualitatively. And I think that is what could be a compelling invitation for a teacher who is already burdened by too many things going on in a classroom, right? Yes, there is an expectation to do something with this new thing, but maybe to be aware that it may qualitatively change something that they've already been doing, which means something that may take 40 minutes before may not take 40 minutes, or may look different, or it's helping you reset certain objectives. So I would work with the teacher, I would say, to see how best we can think about it together without making it look additive, because I don't think any education technology will be just an addition to what they're doing. It will be going in there to make some significant changes. So it is for us to decide what changes we want, and think about then think about what it means for that 40-minute period. Um, maybe you can do something. Maybe it'll do something different than what the classroom was traditionally doing. But anyway, just one thought there. But I would definitely work with the teacher to figure that out.
I just want to
So
quickly
there is. Mhm.
I want to quickly give an example, maybe to support what Gayatri was saying. So one of the projects that I'm involved in is providing feedback to student science essays in classrooms. So this is a project that we are conducting with a couple of schools here in Wisconsin. And the teachers that we work with, we've been partnering for like 3 to 4 years. Like my collaborator has been partnering, and I'm just coming in as a technology person. But the goal there is sort of redefining what the classroom learning looks like. So instead of imagining a classroom where there is teacher in the front of the room that is who is there to sort of deliver and so sort of like impart this knowledge, and the students are sitting at their desks and taking notes, and maybe there is some activities, but it's usually like that. If a classroom looks like that, could we think of a technology that that helps teacher reimagine new ways of teaching and engaging with students? So the example I mentioned is where the students are working with digital simulations, and they are trying to build a roller coaster, and they're trying to come up with hypothesis of energy concepts, potential energy, law of conservation of energy based on the height of the roller coaster, the weight of the roller coaster, and so on, right? And as students are doing that, they end up writing a lot of essays, because instead of telling students what law of conservation of energy is, students are trying to come up with their own understanding of law of conservation of energy through this process of scientific inquiry. And if that is happening, one of the obvious questions that may come up is, how do we know that students are, how do we take care of misconceptions? Again, you can say, should we be worried so much about misconceptions? Well, that is a open question for you. But if misconceptions are a concern for the teacher, then a technological solution that we've been working with is using large language models to provide feedback for students writing, which otherwise would probably go unchecked for several weeks, because teachers do not have the capacity to be looking at 30 essays every day, right? So thinking of technology as a teaching support, as a teaching tool. But at the same time, maybe this question also, the question that Deepak raised, also opens up a bigger sort of a philosophical question of why is there so much emphasis on quantity over quality? Why is it that we are so obsessed with making sure that the students know all of these concepts and blah, blah, blah? So if we were to think about going back to our conversation about ChatGPT and ways in which it may change education, if you want to put it in that way, then if there is a tool like ChatGPT that's going to come up, that if we can rely on some of these factual knowledge, could we rather focus on maybe critical thinking or other aspects of learning for students, instead of making sure that by the end of their 7th grade they know all these lists of knowledge and whatnot? So again, it is a philosophical stance, and I'm opening it up as a question rather than a recommendation or a suggestion. Maybe as a field of education, we can think also in terms of what are the goals and why are we asking students to do all this learning, especially when our goal is more quantity rather than quality.
Thank you, Shamya. And so, one related question. So we have a lot of questions from IIT EdTech students, PhD students as well. So Ishika has asked this question: what kind of professional development is necessary for teachers to effectively integrate technology in their teaching practices? We've talked a little bit about that already, but her specific question is, what needs to change in the teacher ed programs in the era of AI, and how can we train teachers to be AI competent?
This feels like a Gayatri question for me. Yeah. Is it okay if I put you?
No, I was just smiling because this is definitely a challenge that I face on an ongoing basis, right? Like I teach in a teacher preparation program, which means I teach undergraduate students who want to be teachers. And boom, generative AI happened, right? And then all the colleges are like frantically trying to figure out what should be the policy so that students, maybe should not use generative AI the way they are supposed to. Should we ban them all? Should we ask them not to use them at all? But students use, right? So then what does it mean for the instructor, for the teacher there to so what is it that I'm trying to teach them? So if what I ask them to produce can be produced by generative AI, then maybe I'm doing something wrong. Because, something that I am constantly, again, right, drawing from learning sciences and all the conversations that we have had so far, focusing on the context has been very important. So these students, just to give a little bit of context, students in my class, they also go to a school nearby or an after-school program, depending on their interest. If they're interested in, formal learning or informal learning settings, they accordingly get placed to observe, to just observe and to sometimes even participate in some limited capacity in teaching and learning, settings. So these students are there in classrooms. So we encourage them to bring back those experiences into the class. And one thing that I always recommend or that we pay attention to is context. So how is what the teacher is doing or what you are doing or how you're even thinking about things connected to students' actual lived experiences or students' backgrounds, their contexts. And if we are not making those connections, then of course, then ChatGPT can totally generate your response. And we saw that, right? So students still try to game. That's undergrad life. Who hasn't done that, right? So you ask them about observation assignment, where you will look at an episode in the class and you will theorize it based on the theories that we have discussed in the class. And students are doing their work. So there is a lot of, okay, here is what I saw. Here are the theories that I'm going to apply. And here is how I think about this episode differently now because of the theory. Or this is what I opened up for me because of theorizing it this way. And then you realize in some prompts, there is no specificity there about the students in the class or what the teacher is doing. It is very generic. Oh, the teacher is actually teaching fractions. All the students were, working on equivalent fractions. They were generating them. And I observed this episode and I want to theorize it based on self-regulated learning and then blah, 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 blah. And then you start asking them questions. Who are these students? What is their background? How was it connected or not to what the teacher was doing in the class? And therefore, how is it connected to the theory that you're bringing in? So then the moment you ask these questions, of course, ChatGPT or any of the generative AI is not going to be able to do this for them. And this is where they will have to, yes, it's a good practice to pay attention to context as an emerging teacher, as an emerging educator. And at the same time, it is a great way to then think about what the limitations of AI. It can generate an essay for you, but it doesn't know your specific classroom context, what your students may need. And to highlight that is then helping you understand the limitations of some of these AI tools. But at the same time, like as I said, right, like AI is also great. It is a new tool that's around or whatever, right, that is more accessible for us now because of some of these things. And students tend to use them. So for example, as myself as a multilingual learner, I did not learn, like it was not easy to learn how to write academic English. It was a challenge. But if I had now, like how we use Grammarly, right? If we had ChatGPT back then, maybe I would have used it to, organize my writing, structure my writing, have a layout, and all of that is totally encouraged. And we in fact ask them to do a citation for the work. If you've used it for these particular purposes, reflect on your usage. and cite it, tell that you used it. So having like creating those more of practices where you're able to openly discuss your usage and bring it to surface rather than keeping it under. So those are some things that we have been doing. So what does it mean to train teachers? That reflective opportunity, when they use it, they're also cognizant that the students may use them. So what does it then mean to support student use in classrooms? What is it that they may get by using such tools, and what is it that they may lose? For in their case, it's like not having contextual information or not tying it back to what they're learning doesn't help their learning at all. So paying attention to context is important. So the same way, there is something that the student may lose or gain by using these tools. And to be able to have those conversations is what we do as in this era of, accessible generative AI tools.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Gayatri. So,
I just, yeah,
the,
go ahead. I
the,
just wanted to add one, uh, which was regarding, I think Gayatri beautifully expanded upon how teachers should kind of expand how it is used in a classroom, how students are engaging with those. I think the teacher training programs could also empower teachers to think that it could act as a tool to benefit them in, say, in the planning process, right? Like that take off a lot of load while planning for a lesson. Like I think they are very capable of creating very good prompt questions, like writing cases. So, which was a large work of load that went into planning when the teacher was planning for the lesson. So, I think that kind of an experience with a AI tool or a technology where they themselves see the benefit and the positive side might encourage them to use it in similar ways in classroom. And also being cognizant of likewise a student using a chat GPT, there can be negative effects, right? Like for an assessment, what sort of an assessment can you trust a technology based system to do? What should be manually tested, or a teacher should be manually assessing? So I think that kind of differentiation and their own experience with the technology, I think, will also be necessarily embedded to the teacher education programs that we think of.
yes, thank you for that insight, Minu. So learning sciences is kind of cross-cutting field, right? It develops insight about learning in various different domain areas. But there is specific science education research or math education research or computer science education research. So there are these domain specific ideas, and then there are these cross-cutting principles. So the next question, and we are running short of time. There are a lot of interesting questions, but I think I will take this as the last question. So the question is by Mira. She's asking, how can researchers ensure that while developing any technology or learning environment to effectively incorporate domain knowledge and learning sciences principles?
The one thing that comes to my mind is how there is multiplicity of when you say, for instance, you think of science education or math education. I'm sure within science education there are very different ways of approaching a science education, right? And there are places where there are consensus, and places there are still debates around what are some of those best practices. So if anything, I think learning sciences and the more traditional education research and domain specific research maybe should probably try to inform each other. And for me as a learning sciences researcher, especially someone trying to design technology, I often tend to have collaborators, and I rely very heavily on their expertise to make sure that we are doing justice in the technology design to some of those fundamental principles. Say in the example I was giving earlier about providing feedback to student sciences, say scientific argumentation is there are different claims for what are we looking for when we are looking at student science explanations, right? how important is the scientific understanding, how important is the language, is language part of science practice, is being able to explain versus understanding the concept. So all of those are still topics that are debated within each of these fields. So I almost think of a learning sciences project, especially involving technology, as an interdisciplinary team trying to bring expertise from many different aspects together instead of um, uh, just a technology development project.
So, kind of to add to what Shamya was saying, I think what we do in our work, where we do, we work with engineering education a lot, and I think we have to borrow from the understanding of engineering. So I think when we do learning sciences research and you want to design technology, like Shamya was saying, either you know about the domain or you have a collaborator who understands the domain, because every domain has its own epistemic practices, has its way of doing things. So when we want to study engineering design, then of course we read literature on what is being said about what does it mean to do engineering design, what is a concept in engineering, and what is valued in engineering. But then one thing we do is we partner a lot with the instructors who are teaching engineering, because they are they have experience in the teaching and practice of engineering. So they have a lot of experience with what it means to do engineering. So in some sense, we try to capture their perspective about what is the domain knowledge of their domain, what is the valued practice, what kind of language is used, what kind of representations are used, and so on. And then we bring in the learning sciences ideas when we design our both the learning environments, and then do the research around it. So I think having an understanding of the domain, or having a partner who understands the domain, is very important. What are the nuances of the domain itself? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aditi. And I would like to thank all the panelists for such a insightful and generative discussion. There are a lot of questions, so your ideas have also generated new thoughts and questions in the minds of audience. And um, I'm sure that the, they can sort of take these ideas further in their works. So thank you all for this wonderful, insightful session.
Thanks for moderating, Sugat.
Thanks for moderating, Sugat. It was a great session.
Thank you, Sugat, and the EdTech Society for hosting this.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was great to hear everyone. Bye.
And now we will have Lakshmi telling us about our next program.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to the panelists and the critical insights that they shared. Thank you, Sugat, for putting this together and bringing out the insights via your questions. I mean, there was a whole lot of planning that went behind it. So thank you to that. And thank you to everybody who engaged via questions online as well as offline. Some of the ET PhD students engaged with it offline. So I would also like to thank the people in the background, for this to make it happen. The EdTech Society members, Dr. Briju, Dr. Sarika, and the PhD research scholar Ram. So before we close this session, I want you to kind of keep checking out the EdTech Society events that are happening. The first one I want to give you a reminder is on June 8th, there's a masterclass by Professor Ritwajit Majumdar. He's from Kumamoto University. And his masterclass is titled Designing Data-Driven Services for Technology-Enhanced Education. But also, I would want to give a general shout out to the Technology for Education conference that's happening this time at IIT Gandhinagar from 6 to 8 December 2024. Do watch out for the call for papers. There is an interesting research buddy program that's happening. Please do kind of engage with it if you want to write papers. All everyone is invited, like researchers, developers, as well as practitioners. So I would like to close this session. Thank you all, and thank you for your time. See you soon again. Bye.